Alright, moving on with our topic. Let's talk about the type of wines. For the type of wines, there's actually 5 different types of wines. We have the red wine, the white wine, and we have the rosé, and we have the sweet wine or the dessert wine, and also the sparkling wines. So let's differentiate regarding these types of wines. So as you well know that red wine comes from red grapes and white wine comes from white grapes. But how about the rosé? That was I was mentioning earlier regarding the Zinfandel, because the Zinfandel is basically a, um, a red wine, because there's a red Zinfandel. But how it become a rosé or a pink one? It's the reason for it is just because the fermentation process, or the traditional way, which is the connection of the skin itself. So when they produce this rosé, they let the skin of the grapes to be in touch on the juice on a certain time period. It maybe goes up to 2 hours to 20 hours that they're going to leave the skin of the grape itself on the juice of the grapes. So the more time that the grapes touch the grape juice itself, it leaves the color, and the color varies depending on the time that you will keep the skin of the grapes stays on the wine. So it goes from white up to pink to reddish type. That's why, as I'm mentioning, that the Zinfandel is a very tricky wine, because there is no white Zinfandel actually. White Zinfandel grapes, because there's only one Zinfandel, which is the red Zinfandel. They call it the white Zinfandel. It's just because when they fermented the grapes, or when they make the grape itself, they take the juice, so that becomes the white juice that comes from the red Zinfandel, red skin Zinfandel, and they're going to take that portion, and that what they call a white Zinfandel. And then, as I mentioned, that they have to keep the skin of the grapes on the juice to give the color. And the more this skin of the juice, or the color of the skin of the juice, stays on the wine itself, it gives you a different color. So that's why they have the white Zinfandel, and they have the rosé, and they have the red Zinfandel. Which the red Zinfandels is they keep the grapes, or the skin of the grapes in the container itself. So they have the red Zinfandel. But then for the rosé wine, this one thing that they're using, but they're trying to abolish now, is the mixing of 2 grape variety. The mixing of this one is basically you're gonna get a portion of a red wine and a white wine, and then you mix it together. So that's not the proper way of making a rosé. It's always better with the traditional way of touching the skin, as they say. So basically on the Zinfandel is more on red side of the red wines, but the taste of it, it's basically, it gets you a mix of sweetness and the tartness of berries. So you can consider a Zinfandel as a light wine. It's not more on the sweet, but as I mentioned, we have also a sweet wine, which we're going to tackle next. Okay, going on, and so we finished with the rosé, so we go for the sweet wines. What can we say about the sweet wines? Well, they have this, both actually is a natural process, because they're using a muscat grapes, or a muscatel, or they call it muscato, whichever in the place or in the world of a country that muscat grapes come from. because I was searching for the origin of the Muscat grapes, and they told, and as I read on the notes, that it comes from UAE, United Arab Emirates. So, but the thing is, now the biggest production of Muscat uh, is in the US, which is composed of 50 or 51% of the market is coming from the US. So let's talk about the Muscat grapes. That it is a table grapes, so it has more sweetness to it. But they're using it as a wine for the sweet wines. So if you're going to ask for a Muscat or a Muscatello or a Moscato, you can always expect a sweet wine for it. But it really depends which part of the world or which country it's come from. And that's our sweet wines. And sweet wines is not only goes to Muscat. They considered the port wine as a sweet wine as well. They have the sherry wine, and also a Sauterne is a sweet wine as well. But just a little footnote for you that sweet wine is high in alcohol content. Yes, because as you can see, sweet wine has more sugar in it. So the more sugar that you have on the grapes is more alcohol content, more alcohol that you can get. So the alcohol content of a wine is about 14% up, maybe 13.5 to 14% up. That's the alcohol content of the of wine. Not like in these table wines or the traditionals, the white wine or red wines that we have. It's basically the alcohol content that they're using. It depends in wherever the part of the world you are. So mostly in the US, they have at least the highest one is, I think, it's 13.5% of alcohol. So it's in a sense that it sounds, it's not a lot, but it's really a lot of alcohol on a bottle of wine with a 13% alcohol. In the Mediterranean, they're using an average of about 11% of alcohol per bottle of wines. Okay, going on with these sweet wines. Well, the sweet wines, we have this Sauterne is a area or a place in France that developed the called Sauternes. It's just because they have this one type of fungi that makes their wine sweet. And mind you that they're not using a Muscat grapes in Sauternes. They're using a Semillon grapes. So what happened was, when they harvest the Semillon, and then if they want to make a sweet wine, they let the grapes stays for more time on the vineyards, and then this particular fungus or moss or mold, whatever you call it, is going to penetrate the skin of the grapes, and by doing that, it removes the acidity of the wine, but keeps the sweetness or the sugar on the grapes. So they have developed this one through times, and well, in the result, they get this Riesling, which is a very famous sweet wine. When you say you want to order a Sauterne, it's basically it's a sweet wine actually, and it's one of the best. It's you cannot consider a natural, or maybe I can tell it it's a natural way because they waited for the process, they waited for the mold to build up, so it can give sweetness for the grape itself. But mind you, they don't use the Muscat grapes, but they use Semillon, the one that I was mentioning to you earlier regarding the characteristic of a Semillon Blanc. And also we have what they call an ice wine. Ice wine basically grows on the northern part of the world. They have it in France and they also have it in Canada. It's the same process. It's like the sauternes that they have to keep the grapes out on the vineyards. And what happens is, the longer the grapes stays on the vineyards, the more the grapes get ripe. And then here comes the snows that freeze the grapes. I was thinking if just like making this the fungus that covered the white wine in sauternes. It's more like the same type of things, but the one in Canada or northern part of France is basically they're freezing the grape itself, and they keep it longer on the winery or in the on the vineyard to at least get more ripened or more sweeter. And then where's come the time that this was covered with a when the grapes is frozen, and that's the time that they're going to harvest it. And it's just because of the sweetness of the wines, and it was freeze, so they have this more on the sweetness of it, and it's more on the high alcohol content, so it becomes a sweet wine. So the difference I was thinking now is just the mold is like the ice, something like that. And also we have this sparkling wines. I was mentioning on my previous blog regarding sparkling wines, the champagne or bubbly or things like that. I mentioned on my previous blog, but if you want to watch it over again, so please feel free, and so you can always get additional views on my video. So sparkling wine and champagne, I already told you the difference, but now let's be more specific about it. In French region, they have this champagne, but doesn't grow in Champagne area, so they call it crémant. Yes, that's the sparkling wine in France. So they have the sparkling wines, which is the champagne, and they have the sparkling wine which they call crémant. That's more like on genetic names for their wines. As I mentioned, Prosecco if you are in Italy, and Cava if you are in Spain. And yes, you know that it's a double fermentation type of wine that they when they ferment the wine, they add additional fermentation or adding yeast or alcohol to give more bubbling on the wine. I don't want to repeat myself, but it seems like that I was repeating it once again. But just an additional information for you, that you might see quite a lot of what they call a bubbly or sparkling wine, which is far more cheaper than the average champagne or sparkling wines. It's just because they're not using the traditional way of making champagne or sparkling wines. This type of sparkler or bubbly is they just adding a carbon dioxide. Yes, so they have the tank of the wine, and then they just put this some sort of carbon dioxide to make this wine sparkle or has a bubble. So that's the cheapest way and the fastest way to make a sparkling wine. So that's the difference between a champagne sparkling wine and a bubbly. So not to mention, just to mention regarding this carbon dioxide that they have to induce to the wine itself to make the bubbles. And a simple, if you're looking for a champagne, and the best champagne that you ever get is the finer the bubble is, it's more better. Because if you see a sparkling wine, you get the bubble just that's it's big bubbles. That's just an ordinary one. But if you want to have the finest one, look for the bubbles that's really fine, and that's how you define how to look on a nice champagne. And just one more thing regarding the wines. You can actually distinguish the uh, the variety or the grapes that they use on the wine just by looking at the color of the wine. So maybe you can check the different colors of it, and you can easily distinguish if this one is a Sauvignon Blanc, of this is a Chardonnay, or this is a Semillon Blanc, or this one is. But come to think of it, the Merlot and the Cabernet and the Cabernet, it's almost on the same side. It's only the Pinot Noir, which is more on the lighter color, which if you can see it on the glass. Unfortunately, I don't have a materials here that maybe I can show you. Lack of budget. But don't you worry, maybe next time we're going to have a bottle of wine together with us here. So at the same time, we can just learn and give some notes for it. So if you have any question regarding these wines, so we still have a lot of things to discuss regarding the wines. And it seems like we're okay. But I was just mentioning, if you have any question regarding wines, please do comment or send me a message if you want to give us some information as well regarding this lecture or this topic that we are doing at the moment.